Thanks for joining, everyone. My name's Carolyn Allum. I'm a proud alum from the class of 2005, and I have the privilege of planning events like Homecoming for UC Berkeley. We're going to get started in a second here, but before we begin, I just wanted to do a couple housekeeping notes. First, please note that we are recording the event. So if you don't want to appear on camera, you can mute your video. If you don't want to have your audio on camera, keep your audio muted. But during Blaine and Thomas's presentation, you are welcome to unmute yourself to ask a question, ask questions in the chat, whatever you're comfortable with within Zoom. And other than that, it's pretty straightforward. We're going to keep it really casual in conversation today. It is a quick, icebreaker. If you open up your chat at the bottom, let's see where everyone's from and what year you are, your favorite craft beers. Just say a quick hello with answers to some of those questions. Let's see. Do we have anything going in the chat yet? Don't be shy. Here we go. Greg from San Mateo, Bill from San Diego. Therese likes Calicraft, of course. Awesome. All right, let's keep that going while I tell you a little bit about our presenters today. First, I would like to absolutely take a minute to thank the supporters of UC Berkeley for joining us. We all really benefit from the support of generations of donors, and we appreciate your ongoing support for the university. So our speakers today are Blaine Landberg, who is class of 2001, and Thomas Vo. Blaine is the founder and CEO of Calicraft. After graduating from UC Berkeley in 2001, he started his career at Honest Tea, building the brand from the ground up, and an eventual acquisition by Coca-Cola. With 21 years of beverage industry experience, he founded Calicraft, which is an innovative adult beverage company focusing on beer first. He currently resides in Walnut Creek. And Thomas is the brand director and brewmaster for Calicraft. After a year-long stint at Berkeley as a research assistant and lab manager, he left Cal and started the research and development division at Calicraft. He's a marketing and product professional who's developing disruptive products with a modern perspective. He holds an MBA from St. Mary's College and currently resides in Concord. So please join me in welcoming Blaine and Thomas.
Hey, everybody. Happy Saturday. Woo woo. Shout out to Greg. I see you there, buddy. Good to see you. Also, Peter from Truckee. Thanks for joining, brother. Definitely appreciate it. I know we got some beers coming your way. They didn't make it out on time, but these ones are on us. So thank you, man. And then also Stacy in Redondo Beach. Those guys sent back, so those ones are on us too. So just wanted to say thank you guys for supporting us. So today's about having some fun, drinking some beer, and talking about what it's like to what is an innovative adult beverage company, T?
That's just us coming up with words because that's what I think that's the Cal alum thing, right? Come up with your job.
Yeah, create if you land a job, make your own job. That's what we do. So we made our own categories.
But it's mostly because we're lack the focus to focus on one thing.
Yeah. So a little bit about myself. So I grew up. So I'm now 42. Grew up in a little town called Willows outside of Chico. I jokingly say it's 7,000 people counting dogs, cats, and fence posts. And when I was a kid, I used to go to all of our Christmas events. I'd go and like all my family would bring the different beers from around the world. And when I'd go, I remember I was like, what is this? What is this? What is this? And sure enough, like, so craft beer became embedded into who I was. And it wasn't just about beer or the consumption of beer or alcohol. It was about what it represented and what it meant to us. So I knew actually from the age of 5 in 1983, if you come to the tap room, you'll see my uncle brought beers. And as a 5-year-old, one of them, he made it with hops from Australia. And it had a picture of a kangaroo peeing in a bucket. And as a 5-year-old, I thought it was hilarious. And it said, hopping good from down under. There's another one that was made that said, beer so good, you swear it was homemade, or beer the way mom used to make it. So what I'm saying is that the idea about craft beer, craft beverages, the notion of that what you can do and what you can make is most importantly never done before, or you could build off of other things that people have done. For us at Calicraft, that's our guiding light. with the foundation of sustainability and kind of being progressive in terms of how we think, not just about the environment, but also about our community, about our employees, and about the direction that we're trying to take the company. So as simple as just enjoying a good beer to as complex about making a social change and difference, that is what really embodies what Calicraft's all about. And so I started Calicraft in 2012. That was 8 years ago. That's when I met this guy. And we've just been having fun and pushing the boundaries along the way. We'll get to taste in a second. I'll let you talk to.
My name is Thomas Vo. Like Blaine was saying, I've been here pretty much since the beginning. My background, much like Blaine, is not a technical brewer. I was always interested in food and flavors and kind of the story you can tell with those things. I'm the son of Vietnamese refugee immigrants, and so to me, a lot of the culture is in food, it's in beverages, and for me, trying to find how do we tell other people's stories and try to bring maybe a little bit of a different perspective to both beer, but also adult beverages in general, and how can we really be inspired by the things, the people, the places around us, by California, by different ideas, whether that's making something that's super light and refreshing, like something we'll drink right now, or something that's totally new and innovative. They both have a story to tell. So that's kind of my role here.
Bottom line, we're storytellers that like to have fun. So please, we're very casual. We're a brewery. We're people that like to talk. You've probably already figured that out already. It's only been 7 minutes. So please talk to us if you have any questions. Like we have a fantastic person helping us out because we tend to get focused on this. So as you have questions, please ask us. We'd love to talk to you and talk you through kind of anything about from beer to life. So here we go. Cheers. As I like to say, roll on you beers.
So we're going to start the tasting with Cruz. We're kind of tasting in the order that makes the most sense in terms of a progression and hopefully not overwhelm your palate. So we'll start with this. Cruz California Lager, our newest beer.
This is our newest beer. So you may ask yourself, so first off, I'm going to say this before we get going. For those of you who have the beers or you're seeing kind of what we have. When I initially started Calicraft, I worked with a great group of designers that I met from the time when we transitioned Honest Tea to Coke. But it's interesting, as you start a company, you start to understand kind of who you are and what you want to be. And what we found is that there's a person that was in the company that was absolutely incredibly fantastic at design and branding and flavors and texture, that over the period of time became the graphic designer. So everything that you're seeing and tasting is all not just made in-house, but also designed in-house by Thomas Vo. I got to give him a shout out because he'll never do it himself. All right. So here we go. Cruz, California Lager.
Gonna do a pour shot.
Pour shot.
And we're you can consume it any way you want. That's not our job to tell you how to consume things. But just so you can see the beer, which I think will inform kind of how things taste. It's a fairly light, crushable looking beer.
So there's a saying in the beer industry or in the beverage industry that the first taste is always with your eyes. So it's important that you make something actually look delicious. So let's have a sip and then we'll talk.
Cheers.
Cheers. Yum. So this beer is a California lager. You say, what's a California lager, Thomas?
Much like innovative beverage companies, kind of a made up concept. But for us, it was, at least our perspective on it was, how can we reinvent a light crushable beer? I think we've all, especially all the alums can probably attest to, we've all had our fair share of bad light beer. And there's no reason light beer should be bad. I think light beer is just really a descriptor of something that's easy to drink and really refreshing. And so how can we take what we know from the craft beer world and create a lighter style beer that's more inspired by kind of what if we can make the perfect light beer?
And we can make it with a California nod. So to go into a little bit of detail, so within the style of light beers, you've heard of Pilsners, you've heard of lagers, you've heard of blondes. So this is technically a lager. So the difference between a lager and a Pilsner, lagers tend to be less bitter. Then Pilsners. Pilsners actually are from the region of Pilsen. Lagers tend to come from Bavaria. And what this means is that it uses a bottom fermenting yeast strain, which what that'll do is it'll get more subtle flavors in the beer. It'll give you, like, if you're drinking it and tasting it right now, if you smell the nose, it has a slight touch of fruit, but then with a nice kind of mild malt background. And then as you drink it, you'll notice that it hits you with flavor that's like citrusy and nice, more than you would typically get with a typical lager. But then it finishes nice and dry and clean. This is why we call it a California lager, because we did it. We brought some California notes in terms of, you know, touchstone back to some of the great craft breweries that were here, or even breweries that were here pre-prohibition and what they were making. We kind of brought that forward, but then we took some modern takes in terms of how do we actually make it finish clean and fresh and unique. And how do we do that, T?
So for a lot of those adjunct American lagers, you know, your Coors, your Budweisers of the world, they use a lot of rice or corn in their beers, and that's not bad. It just, and I personally have no problem with it. It's more just a flavor thing. It makes them taste like rice and corn, and so we don't use that in this. It's all malt. What that allows us to do is still create a very, you know, traditional kind of beer flavor, but by making it dry through our techniques, it still finishes super dry and crisp, and so you're still getting that perception of light and you know, what we call crushability.
Yeah.
But it's really easy to just kind of thirst quenching without being overwhelmingly malty or overwhelmingly bitter.
And then that kind of more citrusy note that you're getting on it, if you're tasting it now, like you get it kind of at the front, then at the end. That comes from typically in lagers, everybody uses hops that are grown in Europe, which have a very much more kind of herbal characteristic. We purposely use hops that were actually taken from Europe from the turn of the century and grown up in Oregon. And when you transition that, the terroir of the region will drive the flavor components that you get within hops. So these hops are specifically more citrusy and a little more flavorful, but while still making it fresh and easy to drink.
And much like wine grapes, you can kind of determine a lot of the flavor of pale beers by their hops. And much like wine grapes, they're also crossed a lot. So those traditional German varieties were then crossed with American varieties to have the hops we're using in this beer. There's a time and place for German hops, and I think in certain, like if you were to make a Pilsner or especially a Czech Pilsner, right? You really can't make that without Czech hops.
Yep.
But for a lot of the kind of, if you're kind of trying to push the boundary, even if that's a subtle difference, hops are a great way to change what you would normally expect.
And what you're going to find that we do, as we'll talk about along the way, is we take, so typically in the craft beer world, people are very focused on style. By style, I mean, what's a pale ale? What's a lager? What's an American lager? For some reason, we like, in the craft beer industry, we like to put everybody in a box. We don't believe in boxes around here. So, you know, we burned the box, we threw the box, we threw a party in the box and said, get rid of it. And so what we really do is think outside the box. And so how do you take these kind of areas and these kind of the fence kind of around it to kind of get you into a space, and then kind of how do you rethink it? So even with just a light, simple beer like this, you can kind of rethink what it means.
And it looks like we got a question from Whitney McCleary. How do you control alcohol content, and does that affect flavor component? So alcohol content is actually very simple, but also very complex. But the long and short of it is yeast eats sugar to make alcohol. So you can control how much alcohol by how much sugar. And the sugar is just the starches in malt and grain converted into sugar, and then the yeast eat that to make alcohol. So basically you can control that in two ways: your starting alcohol or your starting sugar content, and then how active is your yeast and how much will it ferment. And there's a multiple variables to control that, but it's all dependent on, one, your target alcohol content, and then your target sweetness at the end. One of the reasons why beer is always, like, pretty much always drinkable, you don't have to age beer, is because there's always a little residual sugar in beer. You hear that term in wine a lot. In wine, a lot of wine is fermented dry, which means it kind of needs to actually age out in a barrel to get some of that mouthfeel back and take off the harsh edges. with beer, because it's lower alcohol and it also has a little bit of sugar, it makes it so almost everything is, you know, very drinkable after 2 weeks.
Yeah. I like to say it's like throwing a party, right? You make a big vat that you have like sugars that come from malt. You throw in the yeast, they throw a party. Woo! They eat the sugar. They basically fart CO2, and then there you have alcohol. And when it's all said and done, that's how it works, right? So I'm a little more simplistic. This is why this guy's in charge of making the technicalities.
So there's a couple of questions I'll get to right now just to make it set the tone. Please define malt, hops, etc. So malt is typically referring to malted barley, but it can be any malted grain. That just means grains that's been germinated so that we can use it as brewers. And that's basically what's creating all the fermentable sugars to make beer. Hops, they're a flower related. It's actually a cousin of cannabis, but it's what adds the bittering component to all beers, and also adds a lot of that floral, citrusy, tropical aroma that you can get in IPAs. And then yeast is the microbe, our friend microbiome bugs.
Saccharomyces.
That basically, brewers like to say we don't actually make beer, we make wort, which is what you call beer before it's fermented, and yeast make beer.
Same thing like that you use in sourdough bread. Somebody else also makes
related to sourdough bread, and also related to the same yeast in wine.
And we actually have a separate program that we do that's our sour wine program, where we just use all wild native yeast that's actually on the skin of wine grapes that ferments our beverages.
Then one more question, and then we'll go to the next beverage. So do lagers have more foam than stout and others, more dark ones? Not necessarily. Foam is often and you can actually see this when you pour yourself, if you ever make yourself a mimosa and you start with orange juice at the bottom and you pour the champagne over it, it's going to foam like crazy. That's because all the chunks in that orange juice act as nucleation points. Yes. So it's often dependent on how filtered the beer is, and then also dependent on the protein content, which is often how well made a beer is. I think nowadays, I think most experts would tell you that it's the head stability is maybe a little less necessary than we initially thought it was. But for a classic style like a lager, I think it's important. Without the head, you actually don't get, which is the foam, you actually don't get the aroma. The head allows the aromas to be volatilized. Otherwise, you're just tasting the beer without the smell of the beer. And a lot of the work that we go into making beer is actually the aroma with the hops.
So if you notice while he was doing the diatribe on that I poured a beer here, and then you see how the head started here and then slowly went down, but there's still like a layer of head on that. What that means is the beer is still giving off like flavors that you're not going to get if there's no head. So actually having head or foam on the beer is a good thing. So if you get a beer that's poured all the way to the top with no head, you're actually not experiencing the beer as way as it's supposed to be drank.
Cool. And so then, Thomas, I'm guessing that you are constantly experimenting so that you can keep innovation going. Can you talk about the experimentation process? So that's a great segue into our next thing we're going to taste, which is our Calicraft Spritzer, the Passionfruit Orange Guava.
So let's pour this, and notice, so we talked about protein, right? This has no protein in it. So it's not going to have any head retention really at all.
Much like champagne.
Much like champagne or wine. So what the heck is a spritzer, and what are you guys doing? I thought you were a craft brewery. No, we're an innovative adult beverage company that started in beer. Why craft beer? Because it was the area that we could start with that enabled us to color outside the lines. I liked it. Michelle, thanks for showing it. I'm loving it, right? So this is a very simple product in terms of concept. Here's what it is. Like, I'll tell you first what it is, and then how it kind of began. So when we were looking at the beverage, the alcoholic beverage space for adults, we said, wow, there's all these different things. And what we're finding is that, all people are looking for, whether it's a Sauvignon Blanc, all of a sudden it's like New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs. Why do you like them? Oh, they're so tropical. They taste like guavas and passion fruits. Or like, oh, why do you like a rosé from Willamette Valley? Well, it tastes like strawberries and blueberries and these different things. And we basically said, so if you try like a hazy IPA, which we make, right? And then they taste like mangoes and pineapples. we basically looked at each other. Well, if you want a beverage that tastes like these fruits, why don't you just use the fruit, right? It seems like a super simple thing, but no one's done it, right? And so if you just, the other thing that we are very lucky to be part of is that because we're in Northern California, we've been working with wine companies for years. And what we found, just like in beer, whether you have a lager or you have an ale or you have a saison or you have a Belgian beer, right? We've all had a Belgian beer that all of a sudden tastes like cloves and cloves and bananas, right? That's the yeast strain that they're using. What we found over the years is working with winemakers is that each wine varietal, whether it's a Cabernet Sauvignon all the way to a Pinot Grigio to a Viognier, they have different wine varietal yeast strains that exemplify fresh fruit. So over the years, starting in 2012, we bought, I think, how many do we have? Like 16 maybe?
Yeah.
Maybe 20, like little 3-gallon fermenters, right? And what we started to do was micro ferment base beverages that had actually nothing in it other than just the sugar and water. And what we found is these yeast strains like really made fresh fruit. So over the years, what we figured out how to do is which yeast strains can you pair with different fruits that exemplify fresh fruit. That's the concept behind this. Very simple. If you want something to taste like it, make it with it. Last thing I'll say about that before we taste it is this all started as a happy accident in my garage, which so many things do these days, right? And so what it was is I was making a wit beer, which was, for those Berserkly fans out there, my first beer that I made in Unit 2 in 1997. Don't tell my parents, right? So that first beer that I made, I was using that was using champagne yeast as a fermentable. And then when I was making the follow-up to Berserkly, it was called Wild Wit. Wit beers use oranges. So I made 4 different batches. I peeled 28 different oranges. So I had 28 different peeled oranges. And it seemed like if I ate 28 different oranges over the course of a weekend, it'd be a bad weekend. Just saying. So what I did is I juiced all the oranges and used an extra packet of that champagne yeast strain that I had in my house, threw it on the orange juice and just said, let's see what happens. 3 days later, it was done. It already fermented out. It was somewhere around like 5.5%. So it was a little slightly dry. I added back 5% juice, carbonated the heck out of it, and created, like, imagine mimosa that never got too sweet and never lost carbonation. That's what it was. All of me and my friends that were the craft beer people, suddenly we ditched the IPAs and started drinking those. That was the background for what this is. Now, I'll stop talking and let you tell them what it actually is, too.
So 26 oranges?
28.
28. That's definitely one way to have an acid trip. Sorry. So what it actually is, and so this is to talk innovation. Ingredients can inspire something. Concepts can inspire something. When we first made this, our question to I think almost all good products, regardless of beer or food or whatever, is trying to answer a question or ask a question, but it's all around questions. And so this question was, what if a wine cooler didn't suck, right? And maybe for the modern drinker is, what if a White Claw was real, right? And what if you can actually have real fruit in a beverage? And I always use this example. If I say, let's go get like tiki drinks, people are like, oh, that sounds really cool and really different, and I love all the tropical flavors. If I say, hey, let's go to Safeway and grab a Boone's Farm, you're like, what am I, in Unit 2 at Cal again? No, we don't drink that anymore, right? And so all that separates those two is technique and perspective and intent. And so with that said, what this basically really is, and someone asked if is this a malt beverage or is this a seltzer? This is neither. And a seltzer is also not a malt beverage. Traditionally, there are some that call themselves seltzers that are malt beverages. The way you would make a White Claw or a Truly is to take sugar, ferment it to 20%, dilute those to 5% in 4 different vats, and then add little flavor extracts, the same as vanilla extract, but grapefruit extract or mango extract. The way we're doing this is actually much more like wine or a cider. And the way I think of this is it's like a non-apple cider. So we're using all the other fruits besides apple, or a low ABV sparkling fruit wine. but both of those are not legal
Little
categories.
So we can't call it that.
So this is a very Cal thing. We just kind of made up the category.
Spritzer.
Legally, and it's you can look it up. It's legally it's beer, and it's the same way a White Claw or Truly is legally beer. If you look at any of those packages, they will say beer somewhere on the can.
Ours is right there by the warning thingy.
But it is based with fruit, and because you can't just use fruit, there's actually not enough sugar content in fruit, with the notable exception of wine grapes. That's why wine grapes are traditionally used to make wine, because they're high in sugar, which means high in alcohol. So that's why we need some sugar, and the sugar is actually not to sweeten it; it's actually to help create more alcohol. Otherwise, if we just did passion fruits, it would make like a 2% beer or
and it'd be nasty,
Spritzer,
to be honest with you.
and just really acidic, and it wouldn't ferment correctly. So that's what it is. Someone said fresh like a cocktail, complex like a wine. Thank you, Michelle.
Spritzer's delicious. Thank you, Sarah.
What's the best way to pour beer at home? Does it depend on the type? Generally, I think holding it at an angle and pouring it down, and then at the very last minute, putting the cup upright.
So you want it almost at 45 degrees, and then don't touch it. Like, let it pour, because what that'll do is let the bubbles and the nucleation points open up the beer, so you can see as it does its thing, and then boom, now you've got a small head on top. This has been sitting out and open, so it's losing a little bit of carbonation, but that's how you should pour a beer, 45 degrees.
And then at the last 15 to 20%, turn it upright.
Let it go.
And let it go. And so it really is, it's important, but the little secret is if you don't have enough head, just give it a little swirl.
Just swirl.
It'll come back.
Little shimmy.
Little
shimmy, little shake, get you right back in the right place.
Yeah.
All right.
There's another question from Corey Miyamoto.
Okay.
Can you talk about growing the Calicraft brand statewide? What are the next markets you're targeting?
Yes. So growing the Calicraft brand statewide there's multiple ways you could think about growing brands. Either you can go shallow and wide or deep and narrow. And by that I mean you either attract a lot of people in your local market, which is then going deep, or then you go shallow and wide, which is trying to just like get a bunch of people within a small segment across a lot of ways. So what we specifically have done is chosen a combination of the two, because we've seen how I saw this worked at Honest, and we've seen how it works in the beverage world, specifically within craft products, but then especially if we expand beyond. So we specifically focused around the Bay Area for the first 5-6 years of Calicraft, knowing that we were creating brands from the first ones, the City, Berserkly, Oaktown, which you'll try, that had local mindedness and local inspiration. But we also created those brands so they could also travel. It was interesting. I was meeting with the distributor in New York City, and he was looking at the City can, which has a picture of the Bay Bridge, and he said, "Oh, you put the Brooklyn Bridge on." I said, "Yes, I did." So creating brands that have depth and breadth in terms of your local market, but then also kind of think beyond. So as we thought about taking the brand then into Southern California and then going beyond, we really wanted brands that could travel. Cool Kids for us was a brand that kind of really fit that. And you see brands like Cruz, Tiki Time. As we move beyond just the local Bay Area market, you're also going to see us kind of create more brands. So we just moved to Southern California. You're going to see us. The next markets we're looking at are going to be the Pacific Northwest, Colorado, Austin, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast. Right? Those are really kind of progressive markets. And what you'll probably see with us do there is you're going to see the Spritzer line go there first. It really embodies kind of the idea and the ideals behind an innovative adult beverage company. Then what you'll see is it'll be followed by the beer brands. Those will move in a more methodical place, as it's a much more crowded market. But really, these have a great voice to tell. So that's kind of how we're thinking about growth in the future. All right, next. Everybody likes to be a cool kid. So this is just a fun beer to talk about. I mean, it's literally, you can see it from, is this going to wreck your computer, Thomas? No. All right. I got water on his computer. My bad. Sorry.
That's why we can't have nice things.
See, we can't have nice things around here, right? Jeez. So Cool Kids. Here we go. So Cool Kids. What Cool Kids is this was created when we started the tap room. At that period of time, it was 2016. And what was happening at that period of time within the beer industry, I'd also recommend you just give it a little, turn it upside down, a little shimmy shake. What was happening during that period of time is there was what I call the progressive, but also a bit of the dark days of beer in some ways. And that was where there was all these places that became very hyped as craft beer was hyped. And what it was is like people, there'd be these dudes in flannels with beards, and they'd be like, stand in line and go buy my beer and wait 2 hours, and I'm only going to make a limited amount, even though I actually don't need to, right? And so they were creating false sense, in my opinion, of kind of what they could do and what they could be. What we basically said is we like to make great beers like this. We like to make juicy beers like this. We can all be cool kids, right? And so the notion behind this beer was, how do we create these fun, progressive styles, but that are more approachable and constantly changing? And so unlike kind of everybody else at the time, we put it in this fun can, which somebody created, and just said, let's have fun with it. Made it 80s style, and let's rotate it out and let's have some fun, right?
Yeah. So, and the funny thing about Cool Kids, we initially launched it as a way to test hops and IPAs at the tap room. So we made 14 different batches, and none of them were ever the same. They were always different, at least slightly different hops, different malts. And the one thing we kept hearing at beer festivals was, you know what? I really like that Cool Kids beer y'all do. And we're like, that's great. It's been 14 different beers. It's never been the same. And so what that told us is that the brand was making sense. And, you know, it's a dirty word, but it's something that both Blaine and I believe in is like the ideas of marketing. And from my perspective, I think marketing is really just business from a consumer point of view, thinking of the consumer first. I think oftentimes brewing and anyone that makes products is inherently it's a selfish kind of endeavor, but marketing can kind of actually include your end consumer as part of the process. And if you've envisioned a Venn diagram, again, this is starting to sound like school, but a Venn diagram.
You're talking to Berkeley alums, bro. They could figure that out.
We're on beer 3, so we'll see how it goes.
It's only a few words from me.
But
Venn diagrams, what's next?
On one side of the Venn diagram, it's what you're good at and what you like doing. And on the other side is what the consumer wants and needs are. We try to target right in the middle. So we try to use the consumer as a point of inspiration versus as something to hold us back or something to pander to. Where is the product that we really want to make and someone really wants to drink? And so for us, that was taking that tap room wait in line concept and make it in a approachable package that you can actually just buy it, your local Safeway.
So I'm going to hit the beer real quick because we have a bunch of questions, right? So can you help me with the questions in 1 second? So what the beer is we use mosaics and citra hops. These are 2 varietals, all grown in the Pacific Northwest. If you notice, the beer has a slight haze to it. I'll let Thomas explain exactly why the haze is there. And then we just dry hop the heck out of it. What that does is it gives it all those kind of mango, papaya, kind of tropical characteristics you get. And then even though it's bitter, it's way less bitter than a classic West Coast beer, which would be clear, bitter. Think of Pliny as the quintessential double IPA beer, which is super bitter, right? And so what we did is made it just more approachable, drinkable, and crushable. And then the reason why it looks the way Thomas will explain in 1 second. However, I'd like to hit some comments. So cheers to all you cool kids out there. Cheers to Cal alum. Here you go. Enjoy your cool kids, cool kids.
So we have a question from
Somebody asked about IPAs.
yes.
Right? Yeah.
Tori Davis is asking, why do you think IPAs have exploded in popularity in the last 10 plus years? They taste so bitter to me. What am I missing?
So first off, I don't think you're missing anything. I think that flavor is super subjective, and that's why that's why the craft beer space and the beverage space has so many different flavors, and anywhere from like we just went from this to this, right? Which though they're slightly related, they're totally different. So to each their own. So I think the reason why IPAs have become so popular is as the craft beer movement started, especially I think this is regionally driven in a lot of ways, but to create a point of difference from macro beers, the craft beer industry was a reflection of that. So if you have a basically non-offensive, just simple beer that's produced for the masses, the far other side of that scale is going to be something that's produced for very few, that is heavily intensified in flavor, And so it goes against opposite of where kind of macro beer was at the time. And we're talking somewhere around like the 80s and 90s. And so the brands that you historically think about, Sierra Nevada with their pale ale kind of was the first foray into this. That was followed up by Lagunitas IPA, which really broke the IPA kind of trend. And then it just became, then once that trend started and people wanted to kind of reject the man, for lack of a better way of putting it, it fast forward and people went full on how big, how crazy, how bad. And then that led to the over bittered beers. And then from there, the hazy thing hit, which is this, and it's how hazy, how juicy, how chunky. And so all these things are just micro trends within the industry. You'll see these things also kind of wave out over time, which is why I bet you're going to see a trend towards this, which is kind of like a light lager, right? So the trends are going to start to reflect back on themselves. So that's why I think that IPAs were the ultimate kind of style that was against kind of the macro lagers of the 60s and 70s.
Just a few questions, so we don't miss them. Michelle McIntyre lives in San Jose area. Can she buy the products in stores there?
Absolutely. So look at your Safeways, your Whole Foods, Andronicos, Molly Stones, Lenardi's. Basically, most of your major retailers are going to have it, and then every one of your specialty stores is going to have it as well.
Also, we're in SoCal.
Yes, SoCal.
SoCal, Bevmo, Total Wine, and then a lot of your local places. SoCal, we actually launched Southern California on the second week of March. Ever remember that week? That was a great week to launch Southern California. Woo! I'll tell you that. So the chain stores down there, let's just say, have not been as fast to turn us on, just because they're all trying to figure it out. So, but you'll see us in more places. But you can always find us at Bevmo. Also, Ralph's. Your Ralph's will be carrying these as well. But very soon, we already know, look at Whole Foods and Sprouts, and then a lot of your progressive grocers down there. And we'll always be at the places that are craft beer centric.
Let's see. There's one from Jeannie. Have you connected with the professor that teaches an econ class about beer and wine industry? No, we have not. But if you want to connect
us, do it now.
We'd more than we'd love to be a part of that. That sounds really fun. Sounds like a class I would have loved to take.
What are mosaics?
So what are mosaics? And this is Jennifer. What are mosaics? Is this a newer use in IPAs? So mosaics, we use mosaic and citras, which are a variety of hops. Again, kind of like wine grapes. I think of mosaics and citras as the Cab and Zinfandel of the hop world. They are used in all the biggest, baddest IPAs. They have the most impact. And they really taste great. I do think they are a little bit of a crutch, like those grapes can also be. Mm-hmm. But what's nice about them is they have this profile that is unmistakable. If you have mosaic in a beer, you can definitely point it out. If you have citra in a beer, you can definitely point it out. And part of the reason we use them is, one, for the flavor component. It's part of the style of a hazy IPA. Two, those hops, like all things, have different levels of different chemicals, naturally occurring chemicals.
Mercilin,
and it's funny because a lot of them are also in grapes, and also in cannabis. To remark on my opinion on why IPAs have grown so popular, they're over hopped, and I think you actually do get a different kind of drunk with a different kind of tipsy.
I wasn't
with
sure where
IPAs.
he was going with that, people, but I'm glad he went that direction.
It's related to cannabis, which is as legal as beer. In California, where we are distributed. But it also adds to the haze forming capability in beer, because they have a lot of those precursors that cause haze. And the haze is not necessarily just for the look of it, but that helps, again, inform the way it drinks. But it also has a texture to it, and it also holds onto the flavor components differently.
It gives it that pillowy character.
Yes, as the
brewers, people say it has a pillowy mouthfeel. Like I don't actually ever eat pillows, so I'm not really sure what that means. But it's like silky and smooth. Question about ciders and kombuchas. I will tell you this: there is no beverage category known to man that is not within our arsenal. So be looking for it.
Okay. Another question from Corey.
Yeah.
Do you have any new collaborations?
New collaborations.
We're working on some things, but they're all, how do I say it, in the planning stages. unlike a lot of other brewers, we actually prefer to collaborate. Although we love collaborating with our brewer
Brewers.
friends, we actually prefer to collaborate outside of the beer industry. So we've done a lot of things with wineries. We're planning on doing more things with food, both with restaurants. We one of our first collaboration was with Chez Panisse,
which was the first collaboration from a brewery, not within a brewer, not from brewer to brewer, but from brewer to restaurant. Back in the day when we started it.
Yeah, and that's something we'll probably reintroduce in 2021. And there's a couple other restaurants, also just friends we made over time, and maybe a couple other food businesses that we're working on.
And I hit on this because I think this collaboration thing is super important. We really look to collaborate with people that have a voice and a mission. And we also look to, if we're going to create a collaboration, it needs to have a purpose and a point. And so, like, when you think about like what we did with Chez Panisse, the reason why we did the Chez Panisse collaboration, number one, is because I brewed beer at Berkeley. And number two is because they were the most progressive in terms of farm to table. And then also what they were doing with the Edible Schoolyard Project. Me as a dad who has 3 kids, I found that very valuable. And you say, well, how does alcohol and kids make sense? You're like, well, hold on. Time out. So what we did is we worked with the head chefs at Chez Panisse. We talked to them about what they were putting on their spring menu. We made a saison that used anise, hyssop, myrrh, lemon leaf, and lemon verbena blossoms grown in their farm. All the proceeds from that Chez Panisse farmhouse ale were then donated back to the Edible Schoolyard Project. So when we're thinking about collaborations in terms of what we do, it's not just about making a beer with somebody else. It's about what we're actually doing as a company and doing to kind of further kind of what this actually collaboration can be.
Great.
Oh, Tori Davis is also asking, like, where are the Chez Panisse beers?
The Chez Panisse beers are not out this year because we've minimized our seasonal offerings based on, this thing, COVID. And so you'll see them come back at some period of time over the next few years, and you'll see us kind of double down on a lot of those collaborations. Great. Right. Let's go to the last beer. Yep. Right. So last beer, Oaktown. Let's get down with the brown. So Oaktown, this beer, I mean, they're all near and dear to my heart, but this one's really near and dear to my heart. It's when I lived in Oakland, I created this beer. Here's how this happened is I was training for a half marathon, not a full marathon. That's still on my bucket list. I haven't quite got there yet. So I'm halfway there. And so as I was training for a half marathon, and I lived in the Rockridge area, kind of right by Zachary's Pizza in Rockridge, for all of us who went to Cal, is like, your parents coming to town, where are we going? Zachary's. Why? Because we couldn't afford it. And then where are we going after that? Fenton's, right? Yeah, everyone remembers this. So I lived over by those sections, and I was on mile 10, and I was running around Lake Merritt. I was right on the side of Lake Merritt as you're going around towards Oakland. I was dying. I was like literally sucking wind, and I had still 3 miles to go. And so the only way I could get my head out of dying is I was like, okay, let's think about beers. And so what I thought of was, at that same period of time, the fog was coming in over like the Tribune Tower, and it was getting cool. And I was like, wow, how can I think of a beer that's hoppy and malty and like would taste good in the fog, but also tastes good when it's not foggy? And like what I thought of was, at the time, most brown beers, in my opinion, get worse as they get warmer because they're sweet. There's no backbone. There's nothing behind it. So this to me, like, so, but then you think about a Cabernet, right? And like it opens up, and typically I'm always like, damn it, on my fourth glass, well, my second glass in a 4-glass bottle, but so by my second glass, it's always opened up more. So how do you create a beer that can actually get better as it gets warm versus getting worse? And so that's how he came up with the concept of Oaktown. And at that same period of time, there's a bar called Barclays. I'd order a Racer 5 before it was popular. I'd order Death and Taxes. I'd drink half of those, and I'd combine the beers. So the base of this beer is literally inspired by 2 of the core kind of beer brands in California. And then I amped it up by also pulling from the wine industry and infusing it with different types of oak. So here we go. Go, T. I've been chatting.
So to touch on the oak, a lot there, you do see barrel aging in the beer world a lot. And we do also do barrel aging. This isn't barrel aged. The point of this beer is actually to not get the barrel aging flavor, which I associate more with, whiskey flavors like vanilla, brown sugar, some of these like really creamy flavors. We actually wanted to structure the beer much more like a wine. So in that sense, we fermented it with oak. So we actually use oak cubes as the beer is fermenting and going from sugar to alcohol. And what that creates is more structure. You get more actual wood flavor, a lot more of that kind of darker malt flavors, but you're getting those malt flavors without more malt, which leaves the beer dry and not overly sweet.
So cheers to you. Cheers to Oaktown Brown, one of the original beers. This is also one of the beers that's interesting. As you grow and get bigger, you typically, as your systems get bigger, the taste components that are within your beers get more refined. So you typically have to simplify your recipes to make the same flavors that you had when you were smaller, which actually makes them taste better. This is the only beer that we have never been in. Like, we've tried, and it actually does work. So there's still like 10 malts in this beer.
It's absurd. It's really, you can always tell like new brewers recipes because they're like, there's a little bit of wheat in everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's 2 different types of pale malts. Yep. It's a lot like good design is when you can't take anything more away, right? And I think that's the same with designing a good beer recipe. Oftentimes it's how do you use process to drive it, not ingredients, because the process is something that's also true to you and true to who you are. But this is the one that we've tried. It's still like it's 8 malts.
It's the exact same recipe I brewed on my electric range with 4 different with 4 different pans and an igloo like mash tun in my house back in the day.
So this is a good segue into this question. How did you make the jump from home brewing to brewery from Jill?
Insanity was actually how we did that. So from like literally since I was 5, but since my freshman year, I always knew that I wanted to start a craft beverage company. And so my home brewing actually was a labor of love, but a labor of focus and a labor of passion and a labor of purpose. And so when I started home brewing, it was not just because I wanted to make beers, because I wanted to create a company. So everything I homebrewed was always unique and different. So I've always kind of come to it with that same style. So for me, homebrewing was not something that I was doing and then decided to brewer. Homebrewing was the next logical step for me to be able to create a beverage company and understand how all these things work together to create something meaningful and different.
We got one from Katie Strelo, Stephanie's sister.
Yeah, what's up?
Stephanie's
Katie?
one of our coworkers.
Yeah,
The Strelos.
Really? There you go.
Strelos love their Oaktown.
Yes.
We'll see about Double Oaktown again this year, but hopefully, we have more dark beers coming at some point.
Yes. How can we?
Another question: if beer served as cold as possible, how would head aroma be smelled?
So and that's a great question. Beer shouldn't be served as cold as possible if you're drinking for taste and flavor. And I say that as a caveat because sometimes you're not drinking for taste and flavor. I think this is where a lot of brewers and a lot of people that are professional tasters kind of lose people, is that sometimes you just, you're mowing the lawn in 95-degree weather, you just want something cold and refreshing that takes the edge off. And that is an absurdly cold beer. And that is technically wrong for flavor,
but technically right
for everything else.
Exactly.
So I think a little bit of leeway in the way you taste things. But if you really want to taste a beer, and usually if I get a 6-pack, the first one I'll try to do it real, and I take it out of the fridge and I leave it there for 5 to 10 minutes to warm up a touch, pour it correctly with a nice head, and really kind of observe what the beer tastes like. The next 5 are just going to be out of the can probably.
Another question from Michelle McIntyre: is there a correlation between beer tasting and running marathons?
There is. It tastes much better after a marathon.
Lots of liquids. You gotta stay hydrated.
Yes.
And from Jeannie Carlitz, any thoughts on making a black and tan type of beer?
This is
kind of a black and tan mixed together, yeah.
But it's black and tan is one of those beer cocktails that I never quite understood personally. But I do love a good michelada.
Ooh.
And maybe that's something we'll bring back here at some point.
We made the Michelada Verde.
Yeah.
Oh, the Michelada Verde with Cruz. It's good.
Yeah, we do. So during normal times, we try to experiment with our cocktail program here, which is hard to do because we don't actually serve hard alcohol. But the way we do that is by making interesting market-driven components. And so ours was like a charred tomatillo michelada. So it was all green tomatillos.
That they blend with this huge blender.
And Sunday morning with some food truck food is great.
Yeah.
David McIntyre is asking, how about making a red?
So we've made multiple reds. With the last one, Grateful Red.
Yeah.
Grateful Dead. Get that? Got it. So typically for us, what we're looking at in terms of like, we'll do styles that are more to style like an amber or red or something like that for the tap room. But historically, we typically haven't put that out in the market because for us, when we're putting things out into the marketplace, we want to really have a point of difference. And so we constantly just kind of evolve things to hit categories and spaces that have not been touched before versus trying to do something anybody else has. But for the tap room, we have people that just like, hey, do you have an amber or do you have a red? So we'll throw those on seasonally.
Yep. And just to touch on it, we'll stay on for as long as you have questions pretty much, but feel free to leave if you have another event to go to. Yeah. Let's see there. I like this question from Pete. I think Pete Sawyer. Can you speak to the pros and cons of drinking beer in a chilled glass? I actually like chilled glasses, not because it necessarily keeps the beer cold, although that could be a benefit. It's because I like to have my glass at the same temperature all the time. So you can kind of know what temperature your beer is going to be at. So I know people that keep their glasses in their wine cooler, which is so it's not super chilled. But there's no real negative, I don't think. It just makes sure that, if you just don't pour your beer in a warm glass, that's the one that's really bad.
That'll make it'll not only if you pour it in a warm glass will it make it so the nucleation points hit higher because it heats up faster and so you're going to lose carbonation, but also it's going to change the texture of beer. I would also add to the cold glass. So it depends on the style of beer that you're drinking, in my personal opinion. So I think that's probably true, right? So darker beers in general, or less carbonated beers, if you're drinking something from cask, should not be drinking in a cold glass because you're not going to get the subtle flavor components. Like you wouldn't be able to pick up the oak in this Oaktown as much if we were drinking it super ice cold. It'd be more tight, dry, and bitter. It almost more tastes like bitter chocolate versus as you drink it and it opens up your palate. So now you get like all the complexities of like what the chocolate can be. That is 100% true if you're ever trying sours. Don't drink sour super cold.
And I guess the best way to answer that might be pour the glass at the same. Ideally, the glass is the same temperature as the beer, and no colder. Yeah. But it's up to you. I think all of this is just flexing.
As we say, we're beer geeks, not beer snobs. Right, so just geek out on it, man, and drink it however the hell you like. Like one of the tenets of Calicraft is beer is fun, work is fun. Always have fun. If you're not having fun while you're doing it, then like, what's the point?
Michelle McIntyre asked, career advice: how do I transition from a tech job to a pro beer taster?
I think if you're in a tech job, I think that's part of your job, actually, right? No, am I missing that?
Prepare for a large reduction in pay. That would be what I would say. Anything is possible. You just had to change what your goals are.
Exactly. Reset your North Star. Cool.
Here's another question. Sandra is asking, when is that good taco truck in Michelada being held?
Don't know, but that's a great idea. Actually, we have a fantastic taco truck. We should do that on Sunday.
We will see.
All right.
Let's see.
No idea. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much. Thank you to UC Berkeley. If we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you. Thank you to everybody who kind of tuned in and listened to us. Have some fun. Beer's about stories. Beer's about us. Beer's about community. And most importantly for us, it's not about where we're at now. It's about where we're going. And if we continuously look at that, I think you're going to see we're going to be there along the way. So hopefully the Bears Lair comes available so we could actually go back to Carl and have some fun over there. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, we could go protest it. That would be very counting.
We should go protest the Bears. Like it should be the Bears.
Beers on us.
Beers on us. So thank you all. We had a great time. Hope you guys enjoyed it.
Thanks so much, guys. We really appreciate you being here. Go Bears, go Beers, and enjoy the rest of homecoming. If there's something that you missed, we've got a lot of recordings that are already available on the homecoming website, and we're getting all the other recorded videos uploaded over the next week or so, and we'll be sending out an email with information about all of that. So thanks so much, everybody.
Roll on, you beers. We all missed that, didn't we? Let's do it. We'll get it in 2021. We love you guys. Thank you, Cal. We wouldn't be here without you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.